Okay, here we are in the third video of Module 2 of the Ultimate ZBrush Guide course. Now, in the previous video, we created the armature that is going to provide the basis to actually build the mesh that we can edit and sculpt and modify and all that. So at this point, right now, we cannot utilize any brushes or any brush system in ZBrush to edit this because this is not a mesh. What we have on screen right now is just a Z-sphere, right, or an armature of a Z-sphere. So this video is all about that, how to turn a Z-sphere into a mesh, which is actually a one-click button. It's very simple, but there are certain things and certain concepts that I want you to understand, at this point that are very important in terms of what is the mesh produced, what type of mesh is produced, so that we can move forward. And later on the track, when you finish this course and you do your own sketches, you have a clear idea of how to approach it, because I feel that sometimes that's one of the hardest things, not knowing the workflow and exactly the steps that you need to follow outside a tutorial, right? Once you finish a particular tutorial or a video, you can follow that, but then when you create your own concepts, it might be a little bit troublesome, try to figure it out. So this is the idea with this course. You learn one feature at a time, and I'm trying to give you as much information as possible in each feature. But in a nutshell, that's what we're going to do in this video. We're going to convert this into a mesh. I'm going to show you some new tools that we can use to edit that mesh, and we're going to basically tweak the silhouette and the overall body of this character. All right, so I'm going to jump into the full screen mode now. And here we are where we left off. All right, so the first thing I want you to do is go ahead and load our next custom UI. So I'm going to go to Preference, open up the config subpalette, click Load UI. And the next one up would be this one called Adaptive Skin M02L03. So Module 2, Lesson 3. Okay, I'm going to click Open. And things change slightly. There's something here at the bottom, but it's not available because they will be more relevant to the actual mesh. And this is, like I mentioned, this is not a mesh. So just a quick overview of the changes that I made with the UI. So I added this section here on the right-hand side, and this is where we're going to put some of the brushes that we're going to use. So this opened up this space in here. I'm going to get to that in a second. Then we also have the floor and the perspective, which are two switches that we use in previous videos, and they belong to the draw palette. We also have some stuff in here, but I'm going to get to that in a second because right now they're not available, and these are tools that are for mesh editing, and right now this is not a mesh. This is what we have in the screen is just an armature or a Z-sphere armature. And finally, I also added this switch here, and this is called the polyframe. All right, and this polyframe is the equivalent to, in case you're familiar with this, this concept, but with a different terminology, is the equivalent to wireframe. Okay, so this is going to allow us. This switch is going to allow us to see the wireframe and the polygons a little bit clearer when we get to it. So just so you know, it's in there, and that's about it. All right, so let's go ahead and clear this out and start working and tweaking our mesh. All right, so as I mentioned, converting this into a usable mesh that actually manipulate and change is pretty easy. It's just a simple click operation, but there are a couple of things that I need to sort of describe and mention. So if you pay attention, pay attention to, let's say, this area right here. So I think it's probably from this point onwards, right? So all of these palettes, the adaptive skin, sketch, rigging, topology, projection, maybe not projection. Actually, projection is not part of it. But these ones right here, they are a very specific set of palettes that live within the tool palette. But because our current tool selected is ultimately a Z-sphere, right? This palette will be available. But as soon as we change to a mesh, something that we can actually edit, this one won't be available, but we will have something different. In fact, if you remember a few videos ago when we talked about the primitives, right? Let's just do it with a different color. Right? Primitives, they have a palette here around this area called Initialize. Initialize. And this palette allows you to change things with math. But right now it's not here just because the current tool is not a primitive and is not a mesh, is a Z-sphere. All right, so I just wanted to explain that really quickly just so that you can pay attention to this area once I change it. All right, so what we need to do is create an adaptive skin for this armature. So we're gonna go ahead and hold Shift and click on the adaptive skin subpalette, and that will expand these features in here. And what an adaptive skin does is essentially look at what we currently have in terms of volume in our C-sphere, and it's going to convert every single piece into a skin. So it's essentially doing what the name says, right? It's going to adapt to the silhouette and the volumes that we have established with this armature. Oops, I made a mistake there. And it's going to convert that into a mesh or a skin. Right? It's basically adding a skin to the current armature, which is totally fine. All right, so it's very simple. Like I said, you just need to click on this. Oops. You just need to click on this button here, make adaptive skin, and then Siri is going to create one out of the of this mesh. So I'm going to do that and just show you what happens. So I'm going to click make adaptive skin, and if we go up to our tools, now we have our current tool that we have selected, which is the C-sphere or the armature, and then we have a new one called skin _ Ultimate ZBrush Guide _ Armature 03, right? So it keeps the name, but just added the skin name at the beginning of the name. So what happens is now that we can select that. So I'm going to select the new skin, right? So this is a different subtool, and you'll see this is the second part of the UI that I want to show you, which is the editing of the mesh or tools that will affect the mesh. So you have divide. We're going to get to that in a second. We have divide, smooth subdivide, and the different subdivision levels. And that's one of the key ideas in ZBrush and that I want to talk to you about in this video. All right, so, but now that this is an actual mesh, there are a few things that you can see. You can see a little bit of the line of some lines in here indicating some squares or some polygons, but because this is a mesh, we can basically go ahead and edit it. So I'm going to go ahead and clear this out. This is not the one that we're going to use, by the way. I just want to show you a couple of concepts before we create the proper one. And this is just a mesh that we can edit. So we can go ahead and click on the move brush, and this is going to be the introduction to the move brush. So click on the move brush here in the user interface, and I'm going to right click or press the spacebar. Remember, this is the one that we're going to use to quickly change the size of the brush. So I'm going to click and drag, and now we have a pretty big brush size. And the way that the move brush works is actually really simple. We can just click and drag, and you'll see that moves things very easily. All right. So let's say that I want to make this character slightly shorter, not as tall. So I can just start pulling things down like this, the neck, and obviously rotate things around. And the way that the move brush works is based on the size of the brush. So let me just give you an example of this. So we have our brush size, which is currently this size, right? And then we have a slightly thinner inner circle in here. And then we have kind of like the center of the cursor. Now, this area represents the size, the entire size of the brush. And this circle right here represents the focal shift. Okay, so this focal shift is very important for the brushes, and we're gonna probably do a little bit more of an in-depth explanation of this, but basically it just changes the amount of the effect and concentrates the effect. So the easiest way to think about this is if you imagine like a plane. Let's just clear this out, or actually let's do it over here. So imagine like a plane, right? And then you go ahead and use the move brush as it is right now, and you pull from this point up. Because of the focal shift, there's going to be a fade in the intensity from this point towards the outside of the brush. So ultimately, you can have something kind of like that, like a mountain. And if we change the focal shift, so if we take this circle and we push it towards the edge, right? And we make it something like that, then the next time that you use the move brush is going to be more like this. So we're going to have less fade or less subtlety in the move brush. And you can do the same thing in the opposite way. We can actually take this and push it closer to the center. So now the focal shift is very, very tiny, right? The value. So you end up with something that is more pointy in a way. All right. So I just want to explain this because this is going to be a crucial element of the move brush to be able to edit this mesh. So, and the reason I'm just doing it like kind of like careless or a little bit more free is because this is not going to be the final armature, and I'll tell you why in just a second. I just want to try to get you familiarized with the move brush and what it does and how to tweak it. But the most important thing, let me just clear this out, about this move brush is that you have to do it, a little bit more consciously than what I've just been doing. Especially because you start getting these sort of wobbly lines, right? And this is not good for a blocking. So this is meant to be the blockout stage of the character. So we need to keep things clean and simple. We need to keep things as simple as possible so that we can build things bit by bit, right? We're not dealing with details or anything like that. We just want to make sure that the armature and the base is working fine. All right, so that is kind of like how the move brush works. But the problem with this armature, right, or this current mesh is that is not actually a subdivided mesh. This is actually a Dynamesh mesh. And we're going to get into way more details later on about what Dynamesh is, how to use it, and so on and so forth. But for now, if I go ahead and turn on Polyframe, so click on this new item of the interface, now we can see the polyframe or the wireframe of this model, right? And you have different colors, and each color represents one of the sections that we added with the C-sphere. So if I get closer here, actually a lot closer, you can see a lot of these polygons, especially around the difference between the colors, right? So let me clear this out, and I'm going to use yellow color. So I'm actually going to use a tool that is inbuilt in ZBrush. So this is the magnifying glass. So you'll see that there are quite a bit of polygons, right? A lot of these triangles and squares, and this is what the Dynamesh is, okay? Like I said, we're going to get into way more detail about what Dynamesh is and what allows us to do, but for now, I just want you to pay attention to the amount of polygons there are, right? And this is great if you're just adding details and you're in a more advanced stage of your blockout or your creation of the meshes. But right now, all we care about is the volumes and the proportions and the big shapes or the primary shapes. So having this match resolution is not ideal. Okay, and that's something that's kind of like a tip that I can give you, a very important one, in fact, about the workflow. So that's why this is the one that we're not going to be using. I just wanted to create a quick skin to give you an introduction to how quick it is to produce an adaptive skin, and of course the move brush, so you can just go ahead and change the size, and let's go ahead and turn this off as well, the polyframe, and you can change things on the fly, so you can make it fatter, give it a bit of big belly, and so on and so forth. And that's what we're going to be doing. However, having so many polygons prevents us from focusing on the shapes, as well as making it really, really hard, because what we're doing right now is moving a large amount of polygons at a time, rather than, just a few would be a lot easier. So we end up with this very blobby and wobbly shape, which is one of the main issues that I see in early sculptures of a beginner using ZBrush, right? So that's why I want to put such emphasis in this part of the workflow, rather than the tool itself. Having so many polygons is going to be very, very hard. Now, this looks a little bit sharp. The edges look a little bit sharp because of the way that the adaptive scheme was created. So we could go ahead and smooth this out later on, but we're not going to get into any of that, because ultimately this is not going to be the one that we're going to be using, right? I just want to make it clear that the process itself and the workflow is very simple. It's just creating an adaptive skin from the C-sphere, one click, and you have what you want to work with. But this is not ideal, having so many polygons. So that's what we're going to edit in order to create the proper one. All right. So I'm going to go ahead, and it doesn't matter, you can leave this one as it is. We're not going to use it. I'm going to go back to the other tool, the one that we have, our C-sphere, right? So I just selected that one, and I'm going to go to the adaptive skin again. And just as a little quick side note, this is another great way of producing multiple variants and multiple base meshes. You can have a single tool that has your main elements, and then you can come back to this tool and make the arms larger or shorter, or make it fatter, or whatever it is, and produce another adaptive skin. And you can produce a lot of different meshes to go through. Okay, so going back to the lesson, I'm going to go to the adaptive skin and I'm going to click on this preview. Okay, this preview is ideal because it's going to allow you to see the adaptive skin before you actually create it. So you can click on preview, and right now you can see the adaptive skin. You can turn on polyframe and you can see what is happening. It's essentially a preview of what you're going to do with the C-sphere, right? But this is not the adaptive skin yet. So it's just a preview, and the shortcut for that is A. So you can press A and see what's happening. Now, if you press A to get out of the preview mode, right, and you still have your polyframe on, you can see the different the polyframes, or the different colors assigned to the different C-spheres. And in terms of the different colors, doesn't really matter at this point. All you need to know is that each color represents a different polygon ID, but we're not going to get into that as of yet. We're gonna do that in later videos. All right, so we can leave this on or off, doesn't really matter. But when we click preview, that's when we really can see all of the meshes, right? There's a couple more things to know about this type of switch, and the reason why I wanted to mention at this point, I'm going to use yellow one. So you'll see in this one, for example, in the polyframe, if I recreate the switch in this area, you have a little thumbnail of what the polyframe is. You have the name polyframe, and then you have these white lines at the top that says line and fill. All right, and this is something that I didn't mention at the beginning when we talked about the user interface. But these ones are a really interesting way to modify an existing switch. So if you actually click on the line, just in the little text here above and the top left corner, if you click on the line, ZBrush is going to hide the line of these polygons. And if you click on the fill, ZBrush is going to hide the color. So let me just show you what that means. And that is true for a lot of the switches that have this type of text. So in the perspective, you can change it to dynamic. I rarely do so. Or the floor, you can actually show the different X and Y, has X, Y, and Z. Again, so those are things that you can play around with. And I just wanted to let you know that this text here at the top, you can actually click it within the switch. So I'm going to go ahead and clear this out, and I'm going to turn off the fill. So if I click fill, you'll see now we have a single color, or it's easier to see as a single color, and we still have the line. Or vice versa, I can leave the fill and turn off the line, and I can just see the different polygon IDs or colors. For now, I'm just going to leave it as it is, just because that's how I worked, and I'm used to this anyway. And I'm going to show you what are the settings that we need to change in order to get a much better and simpler result with the adaptive skin. All right, so let's go ahead and get out of the preview mode. And then we have this density slider and this Dynamesh resolution slider. At this point, the density slider is not going to make a huge difference because right now the adaptive skin is using this Dynamesh resolution to produce that mesh. So when we do a preview, what we are actually seeing is what is called a Dynamesh object or a Dynamesh mesh, right? Which is this one right here. Now, if we don't want to use the Dynamesh, which in this case we don't want to because it's going to generate all of these polygons, we're going to have to turn down this resolution. So let's get out of preview mode, and we can click on this slider and pull it down to, let's say, 16, right? And if we do a preview, now you can see there's a lot less resolution, and this one is actually easier to manipulate because we have less points to worry about. Now, the only problem with this resolution and this Dynamesh is that the topology flow is not great. And if you're not familiar with that term, topology means just the way that all of these lines are connected with each other. I'm going to do it with a green color, yeah, or maybe with a purple one. So the way that these are connected, this is called topology flow, or is referred to as topology, right? The way, like in a map, if you have ever read maps, or if you're using Google Map or something like that, what you see, like you can see the topology of the terrain, how the terrain is described by these points. So it's kind of like the same principle, but in 3D. So this is not great for what we're trying to do. It's going to be very very hard to manipulate. So we can go ahead and reduce this resolution of Dynamesh to 0. So let's click on Dynamesh, click back to 0, turn off the preview. Every time that you change a resolution or a density, whatever you change here, you have to turn the preview on and off and on again so that you can see the changes. So I'm going to click preview again, and this is what we are looking for, right? The Dynamesh resolution is set to 0, meaning that ZBrush is not going to use the Dynamesh feature, which is actually a really, really powerful thing that we're going to take a look in further videos. But at this point, we don't want to use any Dynamesh resolution. We want to use a simple, clean topology that is, with less polygons, that allows us to tweak things on the fly. So this one is much cleaner. You'll see the topology or the flow of these lines is much nicer, right? They flow all the way, for example, from one side to the other, all the way to the legs. So this is going to make our life a lot easier when we need to edit it. All right. So let's go ahead and turn off the preview, and let's pay attention to what happens with the density. So the density is an automatic subdivision that ZBrush does when we create the adaptive skin. So if we set this one to 0 or to 1, and click preview, ZBrush is going to give us the most basic geometry or the least amount of polygons that it can use to produce the shape that we want with the armature. So essentially what we're saying now to ZBrush is like, hey, this is our current set of Z-spheres. I want you to create a mesh that we can work with based on these volumes, but I'm only giving you the permission of using maximum of 1 in terms of the density. So when we click preview, this is the best thing ZBrush can do. All right. If we increase the density, let's say to 3, you can now see it's way smoother, but we have a lot more polygons, which probably is going to make our life a little bit harder to to tweak and do basically what we did before in the other tool, which was this one with a lot of polygons. So let me just go back to this one and open up adaptive skin. So I think I'm happy with how this is looking. Maybe I'm going to reduce it to density of 2 so we have less polygons. And now that I have tweaked this, I'm going to click make adaptive skin. So this is ultimately a very simple thing, and I know I'm taking a little bit of time explaining each one of these features, but I really want you to understand where these things coming from, what they do, and how they affect the overall workflow, right? So that's why at the beginning of the video I said it's just a one-click operation. You click make adaptive skin and off you go. You can start editing and building meshes and sculpt. But it is important to know more about the workflow and what to expect and how to control certain things. So with this one in mind, we have already created the adaptive skin. Let's go ahead and find it. So this one right here, that's not the one here. Okay, so here is the adaptive skin. And here is the reason why I added this to this current UI. So right now, I have a certain amount of polygons and I have subdivision. All right, so this is the most important concept that I want to show in this video, the difference between the subdivision approach and the Dynamesh. And we're going to take a look at those two approaches in way more depth when we do different assets and different parts of the character, each one of them with different with each one of those processes. But for now, I want you to understand the difference in theory, right? We have the subdivision approach and we have the Dynamesh. So the Dynamesh is this thing, right? And the reason why it's called Dynamesh is because it's dynamically changing the mesh as you redynamesh. So this is something that you don't have to follow. I just want to give you a little bit of the theory behind it. I'm going to go ahead and push this quite a bit. All right, so you see that I started creating this weird looking shape, wings or whatever there is. I'm essentially destroying or stretching the polygons. So this is not going to look good in the long run. So before Dynamesh was introduced, you had to sort of like plan the base meshes really, really carefully. So if you wanted to have an area like this, you probably have to go to your ZBrush armature and build that part and have a base that looks clean from the beginning that incorporates this area. But with Dynamesh is a different story, and that's why it's such a good tool. And in terms of sculpting being very, very, very free, and you don't have to worry about any technicality. So with Dynamesh, I'm just going to redynamesh. Don't worry about this. Again, we're not going to get into this right now. But if I Dynamesh again, ZBrush is going to automatically and dynamically change the topology of this mesh to adapt or to dynamically basically change to the shape of that we added. And we can keep doing this as many times as we want to. So we can, move this reDynamesh, and ZBrush is going to change that. And that's why having that many polygons at the beginning is not very good. But once we start doing detailing and tweaking the secondary shapes, for example, we can reDynamesh, and ZBrush is going to keep rebuilding the mesh or the topology every time that we reDynamesh. But that's what Dynamesh is. It's more, it's a great tool, it's a fantastic tool, but it's more for the sketching part of things, or when you're starting to block in some of the smaller details or the secondary details. Whereas the subdivision approach, which is the one that we currently have, hang on, this is our armature. I'm going to turn the preview off just so that we know when we see it here, and go back to our mesh. And this one is the one with the subdivision approach. The subdivision approach is actually pretty simple, and is one of the core principles as well of ZBrush and how it came about. You have this mesh that currently has a set amount, like we're not going to worry about the amount of polygons or anything like that just yet, but it has a certain amount of polygons and is being subdivided twice. That's why this subdivision level is at 2. Okay, and this one match exactly what we said in the armature. If you remember, in the adaptive skin, we set the density to 2. So basically, the density is giving us 2 subdivision levels. And I'm going to explain a little bit more of what a subdivision level is, or a subdivision in general. And let's just go ahead and click on this slider and set it back to 1. So this is subdivision level 1. And I'm going to go ahead and highlight it with white. So imagine that this is a simple plane, which would be the equivalent to this, right? And this plane is made out of 4 vertex. So we have 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? So this is exactly as this one that I highlighted in the mesh. And this is at level 1. So level 1, that's what we get. When you add a subdivision level, ZBrush is going to perform an action called the Cadmon-Clark subdivision, which is basically going to take any quad or polygon made out of 4 vertex. So this is what is referred to as a quad. And it's going to subdivide it into 4 more, right? So it's going to find the middle point. Let's go ahead and do it with a different color. So it's going to look at the distance between this point and this point, and let's say it's 10 units, right? And the same thing here. It's going to be 10 units, and this one is going to be 10 units. I'm just making this up, by the way. But let's say that it's 10 by 10 by 10 by 10. ZBrush is going to find the middle point of these measurements, which could be anything. So this will be a unit 5. This one right here will be 5, 5, and 5, right? And it's going to subdivide, and that's why it's called subdivide, into these 4 squares. So now you end up with 1, 2, 3, and 4 polygons out of the one that you had. So this would be equivalent to have something like that, right? And that would be at level 2. All right. So actually, let's just go ahead and maybe highlight one here. So that will be at level 2. Now, if you go further than that, you can have, more than 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 subdivision level, and each one of those levels is going to exponentially increase the amount of subdivision. So if you have level 3, right? We currently only have 2, but if you were to click on this button to divide the mesh, and I'll explain where these ones are and all that in just a second, but if you click divide, it's going to add a new subdivision level. So it's going to take all of these ones, calculate the middle point of all the different polygons, and it's going to subdivide them, right? Each one of those. So you end up with, 4 by 4. You end up with 16. So you started with 1, then you move to 4, then you move to 16, and so on and so forth. So imagine a 4 level of subdivision, you're going to have exponentially way more polygons. Again, I'm not good at math, but I just know the basic principle of that. So just so we know, it will be something like that. Maybe not that big. Right? A subdivision level 3 will be around this big in the current distribution of polygons. So hopefully that explains a little bit what the subdivision approach in ZBrush is compared to Dynamesh. That is just simply you set a resolution, you tell to ZBrush, hey, I want to have a resolution of 100 or a value of 100, and then Dynamesh dynamically creating the meshes and give me what you can so that I can keep sculpting. I don't have to worry about this. But in this case, we actually want to worry about this. We want to have a clean mesh to start with so that we can start editing. All right, so I'm going to clear this out now. All right, and I'm going to go back to my second subdivision level. All right, and this is what I have in here. Now, like I mentioned, I'm going to show you what these ones are with these tools or these buttons in the UI, and these belong to the geometry palette. And if you remember, in previous videos, I mentioned that the geometry palette is actually one of the most important ones where we can go ahead and edit our mesh in many different ways. So the subdivision slider is here. It's the same thing as this one. The button to subdivide is there, so you can just click it. And if you click it, it's just going to add a new subdivision level, have a lot more polygons, but at the moment we don't want any of that, so we can just undo that, Control Z to go back. And this button here is the Subdivide Smooth modifier. This switch, what allows you to do is maintain the sharpness of the edges. So in other words, if you had a cube, actually let me just show you with a practical sample rather than drawing it. So I'm gonna go and select a cube. Don't worry, you don't have to follow along any of these. Just want to make sure I can show you this in a better example. So right now what we have is a simple cube with no subdivisions. So if I go ahead and with this switch enable, go ahead and click subdivide or divide, ZBrush is going to give me this sort of like, a smoothed cube, or almost like a sphere. Right? Because that's what it's doing at the moment. It's gonna take this line and this line. It's gonna average it, and then this one as well, and it's gonna create an average based on the middle point of each one of these polygons. All right. So if you just divide, it's gonna keep smoothing this out. Now that we have more polygons, if we divide another time, it's gonna be less obvious the change in shape, but it's going to be smoother. If we divide it again, it's going to be smoother, again, smoother, smoother, smoother. All right, that's basically the subdivision approach. Now, I'm going to undo all that, go back to what I had, and if I turn this off, the subdivide smooth modifier, right, and I divide, you'll see that the shape doesn't change, but we actually have subdivision. So what's happening is that with this off, ZBrush is maintaining the sharpness of those edges. So now we have definitely a lot more geometry, but the sharpness is there. Okay, so let's say I have 4 subdivision levels without the smooth modifier, and then at the 4th subdivision level, I turn it on and click divide. Now we're gonna have the same effect that we had at the beginning, but only in this small. So this one that I draw here, but it will be just in this area or with a section that is way smaller. That's why the change is not as obvious. So we're gonna use this eventually. Right now it's not a big deal. I just left it here in the UI just so that it's there, and to make sure that it's permanently on, or we're gonna work with it on. Okay, so that's about it. Let's go back to our mesh. And let's go ahead and introduce a couple more brushes to actually continue with the more practical approach of this lesson. So as you know, we have the move brush in here. So I'm going to right click, increase the brush size. We also have symmetry enabled. We can toggle this off, the polyframe. And the whole idea now is that with less polygons, we can actually go into subdivision level 1, but I think level 2 is fine. We can just go ahead and start tweaking the shapes of this character. So the idea here is just very, very subtly try to remove that blobbiness that came from the actual C-spheres. For example, here at the back, you'll see very clear that this was just a sphere. So you can just start removing things or reducing the brush size, pushing things back a little bit, right? And this is something that takes time. So don't rush this process. This is actually incredibly important to get it right, because this is what is going to ultimately give the silhouette to the character. So I'm gonna continue working on this in a time lapse, but before I do that, I'm gonna show you two more brushes. One is the smooth brush and the other one is the mask brush. So the smooth brush lives in a modifier, the same as the mask brush. So I'm gonna draw here the smooth brush is permanently attached to the shift key. And the same thing for the mask. So the mask brush is permanently attached to the control key. All right, so that's very convenient because we have the move brush in the normal left click, but if we press either shift or control, it's going to access the masking brushes or the smooth brushes. So let's go ahead and I'm going to give you an example of that. So for example, maybe this area right here, I want to smooth this out a little bit. So as soon as I press shift, my cursor changes to this blue cursor. So holding shift, if I go ahead and click on this, you'll see that nothing is happening, right? And it's not because of the intensity, it's not because of the the mouse or the pen, and this could be a very frustrating issue. And this has to do with one key thing that I mentioned at the beginning of this module when we were setting up the project with the spotlight, right? So if I toggle the spotlight off by holding Shift and Z, remember that's the shortcut to turn on and off the image, right? And I try to do the same thing, hold Shift to access my smooth brush, I can go ahead and smooth. So the difference is that there are certain actions with the brushes that you cannot perform if you have the overlay or the spotlight. So let me just undo that because this is too strong, and show you what you can do about it if you want to keep this on. So on the brush palette, you have the samples subpalette, and this is the one that I mentioned at the beginning of the module. You have this spotlight projection, which is now available. So if I toggle this off, right, ZBrush is going to toggle off this functionality of all the brushes while we have the spotlight on. So now, even though we have the image sort of like overlaid on top of the character, I can press Shift and I can actually affect the model. The reason we could do it with the move brush beforehand is because the move brush acts differently than the smooth brush. Now, if you press Shift and then you're doing this and this happens, this is a lot of smoothing. You might want to control the intensity. So this is another concept that I want to introduce in this video in terms of the brushes. And just as an aside note, I know that this might be a little bit too basic for you, but understanding the key principles of how every part of the system works is fundamental. So you might have an urge to sort of like skip ahead. You're totally welcome to do it, but there are certain things and concepts that is important to either refresh, or that if you don't know exactly about how something works, it's good to have them clear before we move forward. All right, so let's go ahead and press the Shift key, and I'm gonna also right click at the same time. So Shift to access the smooth brush, right click, and with the smooth brush selected, you'll see the intensity is at 100%. So we can just go ahead and reduce the intensity to something like, 43. And now we have a lot more control when we press the Shift key to smooth certain areas. So I'm just going to concentrate in this type of spikes, and I'm going to switch between the smooth brush and the move brush. So now I'm using the move brush to push things in. Maybe this corner I can smooth it out with the smooth brush. Same thing here. So the whole point of this tweaking of this mesh is just to fine tune and refine the silhouette from different angles. So by default, we had something like that, but we need to make sure that the spine arcs nicely here and that sort of thing. So again, this is something that it could be time consuming, especially if you're just starting up with ZBrush, but it's very, very important that you get this part right. Okay, I'm gonna smooth this out a little bit as well. Remember, this is just the neck. We don't need to have the head in there. And then just smooth out this belly because it's not as fat, this character. Maybe we can go ahead and move things in to make it a little bit slimmer, right? And you'll see, and this is another reason why I wanted to introduce the next set of brushes, which are the masking brushes. I'm going to undo that. You'll see, because of the size of my brush, if I try to move this, it's also grabbing these areas that sort of like fall inside the area of the cursor or the size of the brush. So that's why it's really important to also understand the way that masking brushes work. So the way that masking brushes work is very simple as well. Like I mentioned, they live in the control key. So we have, if I press the control key, you'll see that my cursor changes to this yellow color. So this cursor indicates that I have the masking brush selected. So I'm going to go ahead and reduce my brush size, something like that. Hold Control, and I'm going to go ahead and paint with a mask. So I'm just holding Control and clicking and dragging along the mesh. So this area that is darker, that is the area that is being masked. And because I'm using the symmetry, then I can mask both arms at the same time. So this is really useful because now I can increase my brush size quite a bit, and I can move things like that, keeping these arms in the place that I want to. Not that that is exactly what I want to do, but I just want to show you the idea. Now, another important concept with the masking brushes, we're going to look into more of these little tips along the way, and especially when we start to sculpt and all that. But you can invert the mask by simply holding Control to access the mask again, and one click in the canvas, anywhere in the canvas. So one click just inverts the mask. So now you can move the arms, right? Without affecting the mesh. All right. And the way that you clear this mask, you can just hold Control to access the mask, right? Click and drag and remove the mask. So let me just quickly go over the 3 brushes that I'm going to be using for the rest of this video. So we have the Move brush that allows us to tweak the shapes very quickly, and I'm just nudging things here and there to just adjust the shape a little bit, right? We have the Smooth brush that allows us to smooth things out just to keep everything clean. And then we have the Mask brush, which is the Control key that allows us to paint temporary mask, which is this dark area, so that we can continue working. And we can hold Control and click anywhere in the canvas to invert the mask, or hold Control and click and drag to remove the mask. Okay, so very simple set of shortcuts, but if you don't want to rely on the shortcuts too much, although I would strongly advise you to remember these ones because they're pretty useful when you're working rather than just accessing it from the UI. But if you want to know where they are, you can just go to your tool palette, scroll all the way down to the masking, expand that, and here you have the same options that I just showed you. So you can hold Control and key to draw, and now you can see this view mask is enabled. You can just toggle it on and off, but the inverse is basically what I showed you with Control and click on the canvas, and the clear is the same as holding Control and drag. Okay, just in case they're in there. But because these mask brushes and smooth brushes are such a fundamental part of this sculpting, I think it's better to remember this set of shortcuts from the beginning rather than relying on the UI. All right, so with those ones out of the way, let me go ahead and show you the last modifier in this UI. So here we have the AccuCurve, and the AccuCurve lives within the brush palette in the curve subpalette. So this one right here, AccuCurve, and this is something that it's more obvious, and it's actually very, very useful for the Move brush. That's why I put it here at the top of the Move brush. So with the Move brush selected, if I enable AccuCurve, it's going to allow me to tweak or affect the mesh in a more pointy way. So let me just show you. Actually, I'm going to turn off symmetry, and I can show you both sides, and then I'll just go back. So without AccuCurve, if I click in this shoulder and push it out, this is what happens, right? We are basing the effect of the brush on the focal shift, and the focal shift, if you remember, is that, let me clear this out. The focal shift is this one right here. So here is our cursor. We are using the size of the brush this big, so sort of like this is the area that we're pulling, but the follow-off or the effect is sort of this one. Okay, hopefully this is going to make sense when you see and compare it with the other one. So if I enable AccuCurve and do the same thing, I think it's pretty obvious that what it's doing. So basically, it just makes it extremely pointy. So it's a more accurate curve. So instead of being this sort of profile, is more of a, actually, let's do it with a different color. So instead of being this profile, is more of a pointy profile. And the reason I want to show you this is because this becomes an incredibly useful tool when you are manipulating and adjusting the shape. So I'm going to undo this, enable symmetry again, leave the AccuCurve enabled so that I can, use more of this pointy effect. And that allows me to, for example, in areas like this, like the armpit, I can push that with a more pointy effect than, dragging everything that is around the curve. So this is not fundamental, as in it's not a deal breaker. You can just enable it, toggle it on and off, and see if it works for you. I personally really like it, and I find it to be very useful when you are blocking things, because it keeps you focused on the planes and the major shapes. Okay, so that's why I prefer to use it, but feel free to just toggle it off and not use it. All right, so with those things out of the way, what I'm going to do now is jump into a time lapse just to show you how I would continue editing and tweaking the shape of this, but it's going to be basically using the same tools that I show you in this video. So we now have a tool that has a subdivision level 2, so we have enough resolution to tweak it. We have, with the polyframe, we can see the different polygons a little bit better, and we have gone through the move tool, the AccuCurve, the shift key to access the smooth brushes, the control key to access the masking brushes, how to invert the masking by holding control and click on the canvas, and how to remove the mask by holding control, click, and drag. All right, so I'm going to undo that. And with these brushes, I'm going to jump into the time lapse and continue adjusting the shape. So we're going to end up with something pretty similar, but that looks a little bit better than this. All right, so I'll see you in just a second. And there you have it. This is the tweaked version of the skin that we created from the armature. All right, so just to wrap up this video, I'm going to go ahead and divide this one more time, just so that we can have, a smoother version, or see a smoother version of this character. All right, so I'm going to leave this video here, and in the next one, we're going to continue blocking out our character. So as you can see, little by little, we have been chopping away things that are, very essential in terms of concepts, but we're going to start leaving some of the theory behind as we move forward and go into more practice and more, hands-on demonstration of what ZBrush can do. So far, just as a very quick recap, in this video, we took our Z-sphere and we convert that using the adaptive skin feature in ZBrush, which is in our tool palette, and we created a skin or an editable mesh, and we use the move brush with the AccuCurve, the smooth brush that lives in the shift key, and the masking brushes that live in the control key to basically tweak and edit a little bit of the shape of this mesh. We also covered the concepts of subdivision versus Dynamesh, which we're gonna get into way more details later on, but as a starting point, this is all we need. So let's go ahead and jump into the next video where I'm gonna show you a different approach to block out other parts of the character. So I'll see you there.